Here's the thing about humiliation. It doesn't always walk into a room loud. Sometimes it shows up smiling. Sometimes it sounds like laughter. And sometimes it wears your own last name. The first time it happened, I laughed too. That's the part that still makes my stomach twist. Dear listeners, before I share this story, a story of humiliation, heartbreak, and finding my own strength, I ask you to hit that subscribe button and tap like. Your support helps me share these stories with others who need to hear them. And now, settle in and enjoy the story. I'm Mabel. I'm 61 years old. I've lived long enough to survive childbirth, menopause, a recession, and a husband who thought grilling counted as cooking. I am not fragile, I am not dramatic, and I am certainly not someone who falls apart over a joke. At least, that's what I told myself. It was Thanksgiving, 3 years ago. Back when I still hosted, back when the house smelled like sage and butter by 6 a.m., and I wore that same burgundy sweater every year because my grandson once said it made me look fancy. I woke up before the sun like I always did, coffee first, turkey in the oven by 7:15, sweet potatoes prepped, green beans trimmed, rolls rising under a dish towel. I love Thanksgiving, I really do. There's something about feeding people you love that makes you feel necessary, solid, like you still matter. By noon, the house was loud in that good way. Doors opening, grandkids running, someone arguing about football in the living room. My daughter Rachel walked in with store-bought pie and kissed my cheek like she was checking something off a list. "You need help, Mom?" she asked, already halfway to her phone. "I'm good," I said. "Everything's under control." And it was, until it wasn't. Now, let me explain something. I have made this same turkey for 32 years. 32. I could season it in my sleep. I don't Google recipes. I don't need a YouTube tutorial. This bird and I had history. But that year, I tried something different. Rachel had mentioned brining, said it keeps it moist, said everyone does it now. Everyone. So I thought, okay, why not? 61 doesn't mean stuck in your ways. I followed the instructions, or at least I thought I did. What I didn't realize, what I somehow missed, was that the turkey I bought was already pre-brined, which means what I did was double it. If you've never tasted a double brined turkey, let me save you the suspense. It tastes like the Atlantic Ocean. Dinner started like normal, plates filled, chairs scraping, someone passing the cranberry sauce. My husband Tom carved the turkey with that overly serious expression he always wore, like he was performing surgery. He took the first bite, paused, chewed, then reached for his water. I noticed. I always notice. Rachel took a bite next. Her eyebrows lifted. Derek followed. Then my grandson. There's a specific kind of silence that settles over a table when something's wrong, but no one wants to say it first. I felt it before anyone spoke. And then Tom chuckled. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "that'll put some hair on your chest." A few people laughed. I smiled. "What?" Rachel swallowed and reached for her drink. "It's just a little salty, Mom. A little." Derek grinned. "Did the turkey swim here from Florida?" That one got a bigger laugh. I laughed too, because what else was I supposed to do? "Oh, Lord," I said, putting my hand to my chest. "I must have overdone it." "It's fine," Rachel said quickly. "We've got ham." We've got ham, like my 32-year legacy had just been replaced by a backup plan. The rest of the meal continued. People scraped around the turkey, jokes trickled in, nothing cruel, nothing sharp enough to bleed, just enough to sting. Mom's new low-sodium diet is canceled. Next year, we'll buy her a measuring spoon. Guess we're drinking extra water tonight. each one followed by laughter, and every time I smiled, because I am not dramatic, because it was just a mistake, because families tease, right? After dinner, I stood at the sink washing dishes while everyone else watched football. My hands were in warm water, but I felt cold. Tom came in eventually. "Are you okay?" he asked, drying a plate. "Of course," I said. "It was funny." He shrugged. "Well, it was pretty salty, Mabel." I nodded. "I know." And that should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Because here's the thing about family jokes. They don't disappear. They settle in. Christmas came. Rachel handed me a small wrapped box with a smirk. "Open this one first." Inside was a set of measuring spoons. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. "Oh, very funny," I said. Derek chimed in. "Hide the salt shaker." More laughter. I told myself, they're just having fun. Don't be sensitive. By Easter, it had evolved. "Mom, you bring the rolls. We'll handle the seasoning." That one landed differently, not because of what it was, but because of what it implied. I started second-guessing myself in the kitchen. Me, the woman who raised 2 kids on casseroles and crock-pots, the woman neighbors used to ask for recipes. Now I measured everything twice, then 3 times. I Googled things. I watched cooking videos like a rookie. All because of one bird, one mistake, one moment of laughter that wouldn't die. The worst part? It wasn't the joke. It was the shift. They stopped asking me to host as much. "Let Rachel do it this year. It's easier. Less stress for you." Less stress. Like I was fragile. Like I couldn't handle it. Like I'd lost my edge over a turkey. And I didn't say anything, because I didn't want to be that mom, the one who can't take a joke, the one who makes everything a thing. So I swallowed it, just like they swallowed that salty turkey, except mine didn't go down easy. What I didn't know then was this: that Thanksgiving wasn't about food. It was about permission. The first time they laughed, they realized something. They could, and I would let them. And once a role shifts in a family, once you go from respected to punchline, it doesn't snap back overnight. You either accept it or you change something. At the time, I chose acceptance. But that wasn't the end of the story. It was just the first crack. And cracks, if you ignore them long enough, spread.
You would think a joke would fade out, like leftovers in the fridge, like wrapping paper after Christmas, like something funny that had its moment and then moved on. But this one didn't. It got comfortable. It showed up early and stayed late. And the thing about being 61 is this: you've lived long enough to recognize patterns. You just don't always want to admit you see them. The next Thanksgiving, I didn't host. Rachel offered. "Mom, you did so much last year," she said, voice soft and sweet. "Let me take it off your plate." "Take it off my plate," I smiled. "If you're sure." "Oh, I've got it," she said confidently, and just like that, a tradition shifted. Now listen, I'm not territorial about cooking. I'm not one of those women who believes the kitchen is her throne. But hosting wasn't just about food. It was about being the center, the glue, the reason everyone showed up. When you host, you matter differently. When you don't, you arrive like a guest. I showed up at Rachel's house with a pumpkin pie and that same burgundy sweater. The house was beautiful, candles lit, tables set perfectly, everything labeled with cute little handwritten place cards. Mine was near the end, not the head, not the middle, near the end. I told myself I was imagining things. Dinner started. Rachel carved the turkey like she was on a cooking show. Derek kept complimenting her seasoning. "Perfect," he said. "Not too salty." There it was, that quick glance around the table, that tiny smirk on my grandson's face, and then Tom laughed. Well, we know Rachel didn't brine it twice. The table cracked up. And here's the thing that hurt the most. It wasn't that they made the joke. It was that no one looked at me first to see if I was okay. They just assumed I would be. I forced a chuckle. Guess I started a family legend. Mom, you totally did, Rachel said, grinning. It's iconic now. Iconic, like I was a meme. Dinner continued, but I felt like I was watching it through glass. Conversations floated past me. My grandson showed Rachel something on his phone and said, "This reminds me of Grandma's turkey," and they both laughed. I didn't even ask what it was, because I knew. That night, when we got home, I sat on the edge of the bed and took off my earrings slowly. Tom loosened his tie. "You're quiet," he said. "Just tired." He nodded. "You know they don't mean anything by it." I looked at him. "They mean something," I said gently. "They just don't think it's big." Tom sighed. "Mabel, it was one mistake." I stared at him. "I know. But here's what I didn't say. It stopped being about the turkey. It started being about who I was in the room. The following months made it clearer. Rachel started double-checking things I said. Not aggressively, just lightly. "Mom, are you sure that's the right time?" "Mom, I think it happened in 2018, not 2017. "Mom, maybe let me handle it." Always with a smile, always polite. But it stacked up. At a birthday dinner for Derek, I told a story about when he was little, how he cried the first day of kindergarten because he thought I'd forget him. Rachel interrupted. "Mom, that's not how it happened. He wasn't crying." Derek laughed. "Yeah, Mom, I wasn't that soft." The table chuckled. I blinked. "I remember carrying you," I said quietly. Rachel waved her hand. "Mom, you're mixing it up with someone else." Mixing it up. That phrase landed like a pebble in my shoe. Small, but impossible to ignore once you feel it. And suddenly I became aware of something new. Every time I spoke, there was a pause afterward, a beat, like the room was checking for accuracy, like I'd become unreliable. That's when it shifted from joke to something else, something thinner, sharper. One Sunday afternoon, I was at Rachel's house helping fold laundry. She was scrolling through her phone while we talked. "Mom, have you ever thought about downsizing?" "Downsizing?" "Yeah, the house is big. It's a lot for you and Dad." "We're fine," I said. "I just mean, as you get older." "As I get older." I folded a towel slowly. "I'm 61, Rachel, not 91. She laughed. I know. Don't be sensitive." There it was again, sensitive, like my reaction was the problem, like my feelings were dramatic. Later that week, Derek called to ask about a recipe. "Mom, how much salt do you usually use in that chili?" There was a pause. Then he laughed. I'm kidding. I smiled into the phone. Very funny, but my hand tightened around it. I started noticing something else, too. They didn't ask my opinion about things anymore. They informed me. "Rachel's hosting Christmas. We're thinking of investing in this. We've decided." And maybe that's normal when kids grow up. Maybe this is just what aging feels like. But it didn't feel like growth. It felt like being gently moved aside. Like when you replace an old couch, you don't throw it out dramatically. You just shift it to the garage. One night, I stood in my kitchen alone and looked at the salt shaker. I picked it up, set it down, and I realized something that made my chest tighten. They weren't laughing at the turkey anymore. They were laughing at the idea of me making mistakes, and that idea made them comfortable. Because if Mom makes silly mistakes, then Mom isn't the authority anymore. Mom isn't the anchor. Mom is human, fallible, safe to tease, safe to correct, safe to dismiss. And I let it happen because I didn't want conflict, because I wanted peace, because I thought love meant absorbing discomfort quietly. But here's the truth I didn't admit yet. Every joke was sanding something down, my confidence, my voice, my place at the table. And sanding doesn't happen in one swipe. It happens slowly until you barely recognize the shape you used to be. The worst part? They still loved me. I knew that. This wasn't cruelty, it was carelessness, and sometimes carelessness cuts deeper because there's no villain to fight, just a room full of people who don't realize they're slowly shrinking you. I wish I could tell you I spoke up right then. I didn't. I waited, and waiting, I would learn, has a cost. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach that wouldn't untie itself. I could still hear their laughter from last night, echoing in my mind like some cruel soundtrack I didn't ask for. I'd gone to bed trying to convince myself it was just a joke, just their weird sense of humor, but the memory of the living room, the way they all leaned into it, smirking, whispering, it burned. I made my way to the kitchen trying to act normal, pretending I didn't feel like curling up in the corner and disappearing. My coffee maker hissed, the smell filling the small kitchen, and for a brief moment I almost forgot everything. Almost. "Morning, Mom," came my daughter-in-law, Lacey, bright as a sunbeam on steroids, with that fake cheerfulness that made my skin crawl. She had the audacity to hand me a plate with scrambled eggs, grinning like nothing had happened. "Morning," I mumbled, my voice hoarse. "Sleep okay?" she asked, leaning against the counter. I nodded, staring down at my coffee cup as if it held the answers to all my questions, and that's when it hit me. The way they had turned my mistake into a family joke wasn't just cruel, it was strategic. They were laughing at me, yes, but more than that, they were testing the waters, seeing how far they could push me before I fought back. I remembered what my therapist once told me. People like this feed off embarrassment. They're looking for a reaction. Well, they weren't going to get one, not today. Later that afternoon, my son, Tony, came home. He was all smiles, carrying a bag of groceries like he hadn't just turned my life into a punchline last night. "Hey, Mom, you'll never guess what Lacey and I were talking about." He flopped onto the couch, tossing his keys onto the coffee table. "We were laughing about that thing that happened yesterday, the whole story about the meeting mix-up. Classic!" I felt my chest tighten. "Tony," I said slowly, "I don't think that's funny." He froze mid-chew on a sandwich, looking at me like I'd just grown a second head. "Wait, you're serious?" "Yes," I said, my voice firmer this time. "It wasn't funny. It embarrassed me, and I don't appreciate it being used as a joke at family gatherings." He blinked like he couldn't quite compute the concept that the joke had hurt me, not just been harmless entertainment. "Come on, Mom, it's just a little laugh. Everyone's laughing. It's not a big deal." I took a deep breath, remembering the advice I'd read that morning. Don't explain yourself to someone who doesn't care to understand. "No, Tony, it is a big deal, and I don't want it repeated." There was a pause. Then Lacey came in, hovering behind him. "Oh, come on, Mabel, don't be so uptight. You know it was just a little joke." A little joke. That's what they called it. Not the crushing weight of humiliation that followed me for hours, not the sting of realizing my own family had made me the punchline. I didn't say anything. I simply poured myself another cup of coffee, letting the steam warm my hands, feeling the simmering anger rise under the surface, but carefully, quietly, like a coiled spring. Because here's the thing. This was my moment to choose how I'd respond. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to yell, to throw dishes, to storm out. I needed something stronger, something that would make them realize the depth of their mistake without me stooping to their level. So I smiled. Not a big grin, not a fake laugh, just a small, controlled smile that didn't invite questions or mockery. They didn't notice, not yet, but I knew it would come back around. Over the next few days, I watched them. Their little jokes didn't stop, but something changed. I didn't react. I didn't feed into it. I stayed calm, composed, and polite, even when they tried to needle me. The room might be filled with laughter at my expense, but inside, I was building something invisible, a quiet power they couldn't see or touch.
And in that quiet, Mabel realized something. Humiliation hurts, yes, but it also teaches. It teaches you where your boundaries are. It teaches you how much of your self-worth you're willing to fight for. And most importantly, it teaches you that your self-worth isn't in their hands. That evening, I sat alone on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in streaks of pink and orange. I sipped my coffee, letting the cool breeze wash over me, and felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't laughing yet, I wasn't celebrating, but for the first time in days, I wasn't shrinking either. I realized something powerful. They could make me the joke, but they couldn't steal my inner strength, not if I refused to give it to them. Tomorrow, I thought, I'll keep standing. Tomorrow, I'll speak when it counts. Tomorrow, I'll take back my power. And maybe, just maybe, the joke would stop being theirs and start being mine. The next morning, I woke up before anyone else, like I always did these days. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise sometimes. I could hear the faint hum of traffic outside and the occasional bark from a neighbor's dog, but inside it was just me and my thoughts, and for the first time in days, that felt like a good thing. I made my way to the kitchen, my slippers barely making a sound on the hardwood floor. The coffee pot gurgled to life, filling the room with that comforting aroma, and I let myself linger there, letting the steam curl around my face. I knew today was going to be another test. Tony would be home, Lacey would be there, and somewhere my mistake would get mentioned again, but I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. After a few minutes, I heard the familiar creak of the front door. Tony had come back from running errands. I poured myself a second cup of coffee, standing by the window like I was just admiring the day, not waiting for a verbal attack. "Morning, Mom," he said, cheerfully, dropping his keys onto the counter. "Morning," I said, calmly. My voice didn't waver. "And guess what?" he continued, like he hadn't seen the tension in the air at all. "Lacey told me the funniest thing last night. Remember that story about the meeting?" I felt my chest tighten, that familiar prickling heat rising, but I didn't respond immediately. I just took a sip of coffee, letting it burn down my throat, grounding me. Tony's smile faltered slightly. "Mom, you're not laughing?" I shook my head slowly. "No, Tony, I'm not laughing, and I'd appreciate it if that story wasn't used as a joke anymore." He looked at me, confusion written all over his face, like he had just realized his little joke might actually have consequences. "It's just a little laugh. You're making a big deal out of nothing." I put my cup down and turned to face him fully. "Tony, it's not nothing to me. It was humiliating, and if you care about me at all, you'll respect that. I'm not asking for a laugh, I'm asking for respect." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the gears turning in his head. But before he could respond, Lacey stepped into the kitchen, pretending to carry a stack of laundry, her eyes darting between the two of us. "Oh, come on, Mabel, you're too sensitive. We're just teasing." I took a slow breath, counting to 10, and then spoke with the calm, firm tone I'd been practicing in the mirror every morning. "Being teased at your own expense isn't funny, Lacey. It's hurtful, and I've spent enough time letting this go. I'm done being the punchline." For a second, the room went quiet. Tony looked shocked, and Lacey's fake cheerfulness faltered just a bit. It was the first crack in their armor. Later that day, I found myself in my bedroom flipping through old photo albums. The laughter from yesterday still lingered in my mind, but looking at those pictures reminded me of who I was before all this drama, before my mistake became a family joke. There I was at my daughter's wedding, smiling in a sky blue dress, holding her hand. There I was at Thanksgiving, laughing so hard my cheeks hurt. And there I was on a quiet Sunday morning, sipping coffee on the porch, feeling like myself again. It hit me then with a kind of clarity that was almost painful. Their joke didn't define me. My life, my history, my joy, that was mine, and no amount of laughter at my expense could take that away. I decided to take a small walk that evening, the kind that clears your head and lets your feet feel the ground beneath you. The air was crisp, with a hint of the coming fall, and the sky was painted in shades of orange and purple. I breathed deeply, feeling the stress loosen its grip on me. And then I realized something else. If I wanted to change how they saw me, I couldn't just tell them, I had to show them. I had to reclaim my dignity quietly, without shouting or dramatics, just by being myself, calm, strong, and unshaken. That night, during dinner, Tony and Lacey started their little teasing again. I could feel the familiar heat rising, the temptation to snap or cry, but I stayed silent, sipping my water, letting the joke pass over me like water over a rock. They noticed my lack of reaction, the pause in the game, and for the first time I saw hesitation in their eyes. After dinner, I retreated to my room, letting the quiet darkness envelop me. I sat by the window, looking out at the street, feeling a sense of power that was soft but undeniable. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It didn't need to be. It just was. And in that quiet empowerment, I realized something crucial. The joke, the humiliation, the teasing, they were all temporary, but the strength I was building, that was permanent. Tomorrow, I thought, tomorrow I'll take another step. Tomorrow they'll start seeing me differently, not because I yelled or argued, but because I refused to let their laughter shape me. And for the first time since it all began, I felt a little light in my chest, a little hope that maybe, just maybe, things could change.
The next morning, I woke up to the same sunlight filtering through the blinds, but something felt different. It wasn't just another day to endure. It was a day to observe, to notice, to prepare. I moved through the house quietly, making coffee and toast, my movements deliberate, slow, unhurried. I wasn't just feeding myself anymore. I was feeding my confidence bit by bit. Tony came down first, whistling a tune like nothing had changed. Lacey followed behind, carrying a basket of folded laundry. And then it happened. My mistake popped up again, disguised as casual conversation. "Hey, Mom," Tony said, plopping into a chair at the table. "Remember last week at the store when you, totally," he smirked, "forgot how to use the self-checkout? Classic." Lacey giggled, glancing at me for my reaction. My first instinct was to snap, to huff, to defend myself, but instead I took a breath, felt the warmth of my coffee in my hands, and smiled softly. "You know," I said, keeping my tone light but steady, "I did forget, and it was embarrassing, but hey, it's a learning moment, not a joke. I've had plenty of those." Tony blinked. Lacey paused mid-giggle. I could see it, the first flicker of uncertainty in their little routine. I finished my breakfast slowly, letting them squirm a bit with my calm demeanor. And that day, I decided to take a longer walk than usual. I went to the little park around the corner, the one where the old oak tree spread its branches wide over the worn benches. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of damp earth from a morning drizzle. I walked slowly, letting my thoughts untangle, letting my heartbeat settle into a rhythm that wasn't anxious or defensive. While I sat on the bench under the oak tree, I saw a young mother playing with her toddler. The child laughed, stumbling into the grass, and the mother's laughter was infectious. I felt a pang of longing mixed with comfort. I had been hiding my own laughter for too long, letting their teasing mask the joy I used to feel in little everyday moments. By the time I returned home, I was calmer, more centered, but nothing could prepare me for what happened that afternoon. I was in the kitchen making lunch when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find my neighbor, Mrs. Daniels, holding a pie and smiling warmly. "I thought you might like a little something," she said, passing the pie to me. "Heard there's been some family drama. Wanted to make sure you had some sugar and support." I accepted the pie, touched by her gesture. "Thank you, that means a lot." And then she said something that hit me in the chest. "Mabel, don't ever let anyone turn you into a punchline. You've got too much life in you for that." Her words lingered long after she left. I realized that my sense of self-worth couldn't be dictated by Tony or Lacey, or anyone really. Their teasing had power only because I had allowed it. I could take that power back, quietly, without fighting, without revenge.
That evening, I sat down with a notebook and pen. I started writing my thoughts, my feelings, my version of events. Not for anyone else, not to prove a point, but to reclaim my voice. Each sentence I wrote was a small act of defiance, a reminder that my life was mine to narrate. When Tony came home later that night, he tried again. "Hey, Mom, remember that story about the store? Classic moment." I looked up from my notebook, smiling softly. "Yes, Tony, I remember. And yes, it was a mistake, but it's mine, not a punchline. So I'll laugh at it when I want, and I'll learn from it when I want, but I won't let it be anyone else's entertainment." The room fell silent. Lacey's attempt at a giggle faded. Tony opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly unsure how to respond. And for the first time, I didn't feel fear or frustration. I felt quiet strength. Later, as I climbed into bed that night, I thought about the long road ahead. Their teasing wasn't going to disappear overnight, and old habits die hard. But I was building something stronger: resilience, dignity, quiet power. And each day, each moment I chose to respond calmly instead of reacting, I reclaimed a little more of myself. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace within my own home. Not the peace of submission, not the peace of pretending, but the peace of knowing that no joke, no laughter at my expense could take away who I truly was. And as I drifted off to sleep that night, I made a quiet promise to myself. One day they would see me, not as the source of a joke, not as the punchline, but as Mabel, who had the strength to stand quietly, firmly, and unshaken. The next morning, I woke up to the familiar hum of the city outside my window, but inside the house, something felt different. A subtle shift in the energy. Maybe it was me, maybe it was them. I made my coffee, letting the aroma settle around me like a small, comforting shield. Today, I decided to move deliberately, not reactively, a quiet observer in my own home. Tony came down first, carrying that same smug grin like he owned the day. But I noticed a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, almost imperceptible, like he was testing the waters. "Morning, Mom," he said, leaning against the counter. Remember the, store thing?" I smiled faintly, calmly stirring my coffee. "Yes, Tony, I remember. It was embarrassing, sure, but it's done. Let's move on." He blinked, clearly thrown off by my lack of reaction. Lacey, carrying a bowl of cereal, paused mid-step, a spoon frozen in the air. That day, for the first time, I realized that my calm was more disarming than anger could ever be. After breakfast, I decided to take a drive, a little escape to clear my head. I didn't need a destination, just the hum of the tires on the asphalt and the freedom to think without interruption. I ended up at a small local park I hadn't visited in years. There was a bench tucked under a grove of trees, sunlight dappling through the leaves. I sat there, letting the breeze wash over me, letting the quiet fill the spaces where tension usually lived. As I watched the kids running and laughing, I realized how long it had been since I had allowed myself to just exist, unjudged, unmocked. And a wave of sadness hit me. Not for the teasing, not for the embarrassment, but for all the years I'd let others dictate how I felt about myself. When I returned home, I found Tony sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to read the newspaper, but clearly waiting for me to slip. "Hey, Mom, can I ask you something?" I raised an eyebrow, sipping my tea. "Sure, what's on your mind?" He shuffled in his chair, avoiding eye contact. I don't know. I guess I feel like maybe I've been a jerk sometimes about the, things I tease you about." I blinked. I wasn't expecting an apology. Not yet. But I nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. "Tony, it's not about the jokes. It's about respect.
about knowing that everyone's mistakes, every little embarrassment is part of being human. You can laugh, sure, but not at someone's expense. He nodded, looking thoughtful. Lacey joined him, fidgeting with her hair, looking almost guilty. "Mom, we didn't realize it hurt you like that," she murmured. "It did," I admitted, "but I'm not upset in the way you think. I'm upset that it became a pattern, that it became part of how this house operates. But I'm choosing to reclaim that pattern, slowly, calmly, and without revenge." The afternoon passed quietly. I baked a loaf of bread, letting the kneading calm me, letting the aroma fill the kitchen and the house. Tony and Lacey lingered nearby, not teasing, just observing. It was as if they were learning the boundaries of my new quiet strength. Later that evening, as we gathered for dinner, I noticed something small but significant. Tony held the door open for me without prompting. Lacey asked my opinion on what we should have for dessert. The teasing hadn't vanished completely, but the dynamic had shifted. My calm, my quiet empowerment was reshaping the rhythm of the household. Before bed, I sat by the window, notebook in hand. I wrote about the day, every little interaction, every flicker of awareness in Tony and Lacey. I didn't write to boast, I wrote to anchor myself, to remember that my growth wasn't measured by their apologies or recognition, but my own understanding of my worth. I realized that the world doesn't always need a dramatic showdown to respect you. Sometimes it just needs a quiet, unyielding presence. And in that quiet, I found something precious, freedom from their laughter at my expense. That night, as I drifted off, I felt a sense of anticipation, not for confrontation, not for revenge, but for the steady unfolding of a home where I was no longer the source of a joke, but a woman who stood strong, silently, and with dignity.
The next morning, I woke up before the alarm, the way my body had grown accustomed to after decades of moving to the rhythm of everyone else's needs. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft sounds of the house waking up around me. Tony's sneakers squeaked down the hall. Lacey's giggles floated from her room as she talked to her phone, probably messaging her friends. And for the first time in years, I felt like an observer, quietly noticing the life that belonged to me as much as it did to them. I poured my coffee slowly, savoring the warmth in my hands. Today, I decided, I would let things unfold naturally. No lectures, no pointed remarks, no over-explaining, just observation and subtle influence. Sometimes empowerment didn't roar, sometimes it whispered in the spaces where others expected chaos. Tony came into the kitchen first. He paused when he saw me, then smiled tentatively. "Morning, Mom," he said. "Coffee's ready?" "Yes," I said, gesturing to the pot. "Help yourself." He poured a cup, and for a fleeting moment I saw a different Tony, the one who still had teenage awkwardness, still had a tendency to overthink, but maybe, just maybe, was beginning to consider how his actions landed on others. I sipped my coffee, feeling the calm settle deeper into my bones. Lacey wandered in next, her hair a messy halo around her face. She hovered near the counter, pretending to check something on her phone. "Hey, Mom," she said. We were thinking maybe tonight we could do something fun, like a family game night?" I raised an eyebrow. Game night had been a battlefield before, jokes at my expense, snide comments, endless teasing, but I could see it differently now. I nodded slowly. "That sounds fine," I said, "but I'm picking the game." Their eyes widened, and I caught a flash of uncertainty. I smiled faintly, not out of malice, but because this was a small, quiet victory, a signal that things were beginning to shift, that the house could operate under a new rhythm. The day passed in ordinary ways, but I began to notice the subtle differences. Tony held the kitchen sponge more carefully when he cleaned. Lacey didn't laugh at the small mistakes I made while preparing lunch. The teasing hadn't vanished completely, old habits die hard, but it was tempered now by awareness, as if they were testing the limits of my quiet strength. That evening, I suggested we go for a short walk in the neighborhood. The sky was painted with streaks of pink and gold, the kind of sunset that makes everything feel possible. Tony walked beside me, Lacey trailing a few steps behind. "Mom," Tony began hesitantly, "I wanted to, talk about yesterday." I turned to him, patient. "Go on." He took a deep breath. I realized I've been unfair, making jokes at your expense, making a mistake into a joke for everyone, and I didn't think about how it made you feel. I'm sorry." The words hit me with a mixture of surprise and relief, not because I needed the apology, my peace didn't hinge on their recognition, but because finally they were seeing me, seeing the human being behind the jokes, seeing my boundaries, my dignity. Lacey joined in, her voice softer than usual. "Mom, I guess I didn't think it mattered, or maybe I just went along with Tony, but I can see now it hurt you, and I'm sorry too." I smiled gently. "Thank you, both of you. That means more than I can say. But I want you to understand something. Apologies are important, but more important is change. Respect is shown in the small things, every day, not just in words." We continued our walk in silence, the kind of comfortable silence that only comes after long, necessary conversations. And as we walked, I realized something crucial. Empowerment didn't need to be loud or explosive. It could live in the quiet moments, in the way you carried yourself, in the calm confidence of knowing your worth. When we returned home, I decided to take on a project I had been postponing for months, reorganizing the old family albums in the living room. Each photo held memories, some joyful, some awkward, some deeply personal. As I sorted them, I felt a connection not only to the past, but to the present moment. I realized I could honor my history without letting it define me, and I could reclaim the narrative of my life in small, deliberate ways. Tony and Lacey wandered in, curious. Tony picked up a photo of me from my 40s, standing in a sunlit garden with a wide, genuine smile. "Wow, Mom, you were different back then." I laughed softly. "Different, sure. Younger, probably more naive, definitely more prone to letting others' opinions dictate how I felt about myself. But you know what? Every stage of life teaches you something, and I've learned a lot since then." Lacey leaned over to see a picture of us at a family picnic. "You look happy," she said, "like really happy." I nodded. I was happy, but I've realized that happiness isn't something that comes from others approving you or laughing at you. It comes from within, and I'm learning to carry that happiness every day, even when life isn't perfect. We spent the rest of the evening going through the albums together. For the first time, it didn't feel like a competition or a setup for a joke. We laughed genuinely at old memories, shared stories, and even made a few new jokes, this time without malice, without shame, without anyone feeling small. That night, as I sat by the window with my journal, I wrote about the day in meticulous detail. I wrote about Tony's apology, Lacey's words, the small victories of calm observation, and the deep satisfaction of reclaiming my dignity without confrontation. And as I closed my journal, I understood something fundamental. The world doesn't always hand out respect willingly, but when you carry yourself with unwavering calm, quiet confidence, and a refusal to be demeaned, people begin to adjust their behavior, not out of fear, but out of recognition.
I slept that night with a profound sense of peace, knowing that the next chapters of my life, though still full of challenges, would unfold on my terms. I was no longer the subject of jokes, no longer the punchline. I was Mabel, quiet, unyielding, and fully in control of my own narrative. The next morning, I woke up with a quiet determination buzzing beneath my skin. The house felt different somehow, lighter, less weighted by years of teasing and unspoken judgments. Even the sun seemed brighter as it slanted through the curtains, warming the corners of my room in a way that felt deliberate, as if it too had noticed the subtle shift in our home. I took my time in the bathroom, brushing my hair slowly, catching my reflection in the mirror. For years, I had ignored the woman staring back at me, too busy managing everyone else, too distracted by the jokes, the mistakes, the endless expectations. But now I looked at her with something approaching admiration, not vanity, but recognition. This was a woman who had survived decades of being underestimated, laughed at, dismissed, and yet here she was, standing quietly unbroken. I made breakfast for the family, carefully plating eggs and toast and setting out coffee. Tony wandered in first, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, Mom," he said, voice low, but there was a respect there now in the way he stood back instead of barging past. "Morning," I replied. "Coffee's fresh?" Lacey followed, yawning, hair in a messy bun, looking like she had slept through the night for the first time in years. She sat down quietly, reaching for her mug, and I could feel the tension that had always hovered in our kitchen beginning to dissolve. We ate in near silence, and it was comfortable, not awkward. That was new. For so long, every breakfast had been a battlefield of subtle digs, snide comments, or the heavy, unspoken expectation that I would always be the punchline. But not today. Today felt normal. After breakfast, I suggested a family project. "Why don't we clean out the garage today?" I said, casually, as if this were no big deal. But I had a plan. The garage had been a place where old arguments, old clutter, and old resentments had gathered dust for years. Sorting through it meant sorting through memories, but also reclaiming the space, and symbolically reclaiming control of my own life. Tony groaned. "Mom, that's kind of a lot." "Trust me," I said, smiling. "You'll thank me later." We spent the morning pulling boxes off shelves, dusting, sorting. As we worked, the teasing started, but differently. It was playful, without the sting it used to have. Lacey held up a box of old birthday decorations. "Look, Mom," she said, "remember this party? I think you cried because I refused to blow out the candles." I laughed, a genuine laugh that warmed the room. I wasn't crying. That was an emotional reaction. Tony rolled his eyes. Emotional, sure, classic Mom. I shook my head, smiling, and decided not to argue. Instead, I let them see the person I had always been, human, imperfect, and perfectly capable of holding my own. Hours passed in a rhythm of work and conversation. We found old photos, trinkets, and letters from relatives long gone. Each discovery sparked memories, laughter, and sometimes tears. And with each item, I felt my sense of self reclaiming space, not just physically, but emotionally. Then, toward the end of the afternoon, Tony paused, holding a small, worn notebook. "Mom," he said softly, "I found this in the back of the garage. Is this yours?" I recognized it instantly. It was my old journal from decades ago, full of unfiltered thoughts, private reflections, and dreams I had tucked away, afraid they weren't important enough to share. I took it from him, fingers trembling slightly. "Yes, it is mine. I wrote a lot here when I needed to remind myself that my voice mattered, even if nobody else heard it." Tony looked at me, eyes wide, a mixture of awe and something I hadn't seen before, understanding. Mom, I never realized how much I didn't see. Lacey stepped closer. Neither did I, and I'm sorry, Mom, for laughing, for turning your mistakes into jokes, for not realizing what it meant to hurt you. I closed the journal slowly, holding it to my chest. Thank you, both of you. That's all I wanted, just to be seen, to be respected, and not just today, but always. And then, quietly, without fanfare, something shifted. The energy in the room softened, the teasing had vanished, the laughter that remained was warm, inclusive, and gentle. We weren't perfect family, but we were beginning to understand each other in a way that mattered. Later, as evening settled over the house, I sat on the porch swing with a mug of tea. Tony came out and sat beside me, not too close, not too far, just the right distance. You know, he said quietly, I think I've been trying to make everything a joke because I didn't know how to handle how I felt about Mom, about you, about us. But I get it now. You're strong, and we need to respect that. I nodded. Strength isn't about yelling or proving yourself. Sometimes it's about patience, endurance, and carrying yourself with dignity even when the world laughs at you. Tony smiled faintly. I think I'm starting to understand that. Lacey joined us, sitting on the other side of the swing, and for the first time I felt fully surrounded, not by judgment or mockery, but by a family beginning to heal. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I realized then that this was what quiet empowerment felt like. Not dramatic confrontations, not revenge, not spectacle, but a steady, unshakable presence, a refusal to be diminished, and the ability to guide others toward respect without force. I leaned back, letting the cool breeze brush against my face. For the first time in years, I felt whole. The mistakes that had once been turned into jokes no longer defined me. My voice had been heard, my dignity had been reclaimed, and my family, slowly but surely, was learning to meet me as I truly was. As night settled over the house, I whispered to myself, I am Mabel. I am seen, I am respected, and I am enough. And with that quiet affirmation, I finally felt a deep, unshakable peace, not because the past had been erased, but because I had taken control of the narrative of my life, and in doing so, I had created a space where love, respect, and understanding could finally grow.